Andrea, I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Andrea. All right.
By the grace of God, I've been sober since July 5th, 1986.
All right.
And I don't tell you that to tell you that I work the program perfect. I tell you that to tell you that I serve a mighty God.
Good.
And it is by His grace only, because I have done everything that I can possibly do to fuck up my program. And I am still sober. And I've lived through things I didn't ever think I would live through and not drink. And that's a miracle. Even that I just have today is a miracle. And that's all I think I have. Catoosa Group was one of my first home groups. And Beverly B was one of my first sponsors. And she drugged me kicking and screaming all the way through the steps. And she taught me how to live. And Ozark taught me how to live. And I know that the foundation of my recovery came from the seeds they planted in me. And I will forever be grateful for them. And when I came here, I was young. I just turned 60, and I'm like, God, no. Because I was 23 when I got sober. I never thought I would live to 23, much less 60. Mm-hmm. I never thought that I would. I thought my kids were 2 and 4 when I got sober. And I remember, I can tell you, here's how I got sober. This little lady here was a psych nurse, and she was working in a drug rehab. And she threw a big book at me probably a year before I got sober. And I was a blackout drinker, so I would come out of a blackout at home, not knowing how I got there, with this damn book in my hand. The damn book was the big book. And for some reason, I would just catch a hold of a phrase or something in it. And like one was, jails, institutions, or death. Well, I've never been to jail. I went to jail that night. Just different things like that. My last drunk was nothing different than it ever was. I started drinking when I was 10, and I thought about alcohol every moment of every day, from 10 years old till I was 23. And I can't explain that to you other than I'm an alcoholic. And even at 10 years old, I plotted and planned and schemed ways to get alcohol. My grandmother had a plate rail, and my dad bought her little liquors from the airports when he would travel. Oh, yeah. And I don't know how I knew at 10, 11 years old to replace whatever you took out with the same color of water. But so I eventually drank up her liquor on her plate rail for her. I don't know how, I don't know why, other than I'm an alcoholic. And I remember my first drink. It was a hot toddy. And I know that my grandma didn't mean to give that to me to turn on alcoholism in me. I was sick. But I remember the feeling that it gave me. It was like, before I had that drink, everything was flying around in me. And I could not, my pieces weren't put together. And once I took that first drink, it's like everything came together and I was okay. And I chased that elusive feeling for the rest of my sobriety or my drinking. And as I got older, I did whatever I had to do to get alcohol. And I knew how to play men like fiddles. And I would said, when I got sober in treatment, they'd go, let's add up how much money it cost you to get drunk. And I said, not a damn dime. Well, maybe enough for one drink to get in the bar or whatever, but then I could get anybody to buy me a drink. I'd stay drunk all night for free. Or so I thought. But then I had women like Beverly go, well, how much time did you spend on your back, Andrea? Well, shit. You know, and that's the kind of sobriety I grew up with. They didn't give me any kind of, Beverly didn't give me a break at all. And so, no, I didn't spend money, but what it did is it took everything out of me. Alcohol's a rapacious creditor. It says that in our books. And it took my self-worth, my self-esteem. By the time my last drunk was on July 4th, and I remember all I remember was I had thought I paid my bills. I found out 6 months later when I was cleaning out an old purse, I never mailed them. But I thought in my head, I paid my bills. The kids are gone with their dad. And we were split. And I'll just go out and have one and stop abruptly. Because I read that damn book and it said that if you're an alcoholic, go to the next bar and try to just stop. And so I went to a bar and I got a pitcher of beer, just one. And so by the time I got through the first couple of drinks in that pitcher, I was blacking out again. And blackouts had become like torture to me because I would come to and I could pretend like I would have been a good actress. I could pretend like I knew what was going on, and then I'm going, oh shit, where am I? Who is this? Where's my car? Where's my keys? Where's my kids? I mean, that was normal, and it scared me to death. And that night, all I remember is some guy with long blonde hair and a grandfather clock and puking down the side of his car. What fun we had. I came to in the driver's side of my ex-husband's car. And I don't know how I got there in front of his house. And I'm like, but it's like the sun's coming up. And it's like, oh, and the first thing that came into my head was, oh my God, he knows the truth about me now. And he must have took my car and the kids, and I'm never going to see him again because my car was better. And he's left me here. And so I just looked up in the sky, and my prayer that got me sober was, fuck you, God, I'm going to go get drunk. So if you want me to get sober, you're going to have to figure it out. I'm going to go get drunk. And I walked to the nearest payphone, called a friend who always knew where my car was. I always seemed to have some enabler that could find my car for me. And I ended up getting my car, and I remember that day I kept trying to get drunk, and everything would get in my way. I couldn't get to alcohol that day. And the next morning, I ended up at a church again for the 4 millionth time, and found myself walking down the aisle to get saved for the 1,000th time. And I'm having this conversation in my head. Why the hell am I doing this, God? You and me know that I'm going to go get drunk when I leave here. So, yeah, maybe I'm going to get saved again, but it ain't going to fix nothing. And so I'm standing there at the altar to get saved again, and this girl taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around. And it was a girl that I had taken care of in the hospital that God happened to get me a job at. And I was taking care of her in adult psych, and she was going downstairs every day to treatment for alcoholism, but I didn't know that. And she didn't know me, other than we knew each other's names, and she said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I was like, oh shit. You know, and okay, well, God answered my prayer. And so I talked to her, and there was another guy that happened to be there that had just gotten out of prison, and he was in recovery. And so blam, here's two things. And I agreed to meet them at a meeting the next day, and after work. And when I got to work, I just felt so hopeless that I went to my boss. One thing led to another, and I'm sitting in front of my boss, and they're saying, we have an opening in the treatment center here. oh, and look, your insurance just went into effect today. This is your 90th day of employment. I didn't plan that, but here we are. And so I went into treatment, and I remember calling my mom and dad and saying, I'm an alcoholic, I'm going to go into treatment, and I need you to take care of my kids, because I really believed if I didn't stay sober, they didn't need me in their lives anyways. And at that point in my mind, I would have signed them over to DHS because I was that crazy. And I did 6 weeks in treatment, and I had a man, Ben Hayes and Bob Buck, and they're dead, so I can say their names. And all I remember from treatment is every time I saw one of them, they're going, go to meetings when you get out of here. Go to meetings when you get out of here. Don't drink between meetings. Don't drink between meetings. And they pounded that in my head. So when I got out of treatment, I went to meetings, and I didn't drink between meetings. And I went to meetings. Every time I thought about drinking, I went to a meeting, which was all the time. So I went to 3 and 4 meetings a day, 7 days a week for at least 6 months. I didn't count. I just went to a meeting when I wanted to drink. And along the way, I met Beverly, and I had several other women in my life that were, they taught me how to work the steps. And I broke every rule, every suggestion that there is in AA. I did not follow it, other than I didn't drink. Everything else, got into relationships, did everything else, didn't do any. If you told me not to do it, I did it, because I'm a stubborn ass, and I have to learn the hard way. And so I started working through the steps, and the hardest part for me, step 1 was easy. I did that because I came to AA. I'm sorry, I just think that was the easy part. But I got to step 2, and step 2, the hardest part for me was that there's the little piece in there that says restore me to sanity. Mm-hmm. And I'm a brainiac here, and I'm going, restore, that means I ever had any? I've never had any. I mean, I love my mom. She knows. Our family's messed up. When I was born, I went into a screwed up mess, and it was very dysfunctional. So I just thought, I can't look back at any time in my life that I could ever find any sanity. So, oh my God, how's he going to restore me to something I've never had? And I just went crazy. And Beverly said, well, how about the first 60 seconds when the doctor had you in his hands? And I went, oh, well, yeah, I got, yeah. Well, we can work with that. And that's what got me to be willing to go to step 3 and turn my will and my life over to God. And it wasn't your God. It wasn't every church on the corner of Tulsa, Oklahoma's God. It was my God. It was my concept. And I went and studied. I still study different religions, and I take bits and pieces of different things, and I have my own concept. I will tell you that I found Jesus again at the foot of my bed, and I did not, on my knees. I didn't find him in a church. If you go to church, cool, happy for you. Not happening for me. But when I got to step 3, I played around with that because I kept looking at 4, and I really didn't want to do an inventory, because then I was going to have to talk about me. And I'm looking at 5 and going, oh, there ain't hell no. And, but Beverly did not give me the opportunity to play around with that. She just said, Andrea, we're to the point that you can either get serious about sobriety and put some blood, sweat, and tears into your recovery, or move on. I'm not wasting my time with you. And that scared me, because I trusted everything she said to me. And so she just said, don't overcomplicate it. 3 columns: resentments, guilts, fears. Walk around with your little tablet for a week and get back to me. Every time something comes into your head, just write a word. We don't need a novel, because I'm a novel writer, and I don't want to know, just write a word. And so we did that, and I sat down with her and went through that list. And I don't remember the clouds opening and the angels singing and everything like I thought I would, having this great spiritual thing. But I remember walking through the hall at work one day, and I was smiling. Only it wasn't plastered on plastic anymore. It was a smile that came from here up. And it stopped me in my tracks. And I'm going, when did this happen? And I'm counting, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got 6 months. Oh my God. Wow. I haven't even thought about drinking in how long? And that was my first spiritual awakening. It was just that I'm not thinking about drinking. And my whole life since I was 10 years old was alcohol. So that's the thing. That's when I really started seeing a change in my life, so to speak. That's not to say that life was perfect, because it's not. I've been married and divorced 3 times, and I'm married a 4th time, so I don't do relationships well. I'm stubborn. I keep trying, but I've been with my husband now longer than I've been with anybody, so okay, maybe we're doing it right this time, I don't know. But when I got to step 6, I think in pictures, because I'm an artist. My favorite picture of step 6 and 7 is, if you can imagine all the defects of character, you're sitting in a bathtub full of ping pong balls and water. And your defects of character are the ping pong balls. And every time you get one, all of them held down, one pops up. And so and this guy told me this in a meeting one day. And so I've got this picture of me in here flinging water everywhere, trying to control my defects of character, trying not to be, a glutton or whatever. All those things, these parts of me that just are like, eat me alive inside. And I was like looking at him, and I went, well, what about the water? And he said, and he's looking at me, he said, Andrea, just get out of the bathtub. And to me, that's what 6 and 7 is. I have no control. I really don't over my defects of character, other than I can put me on God's altar and say, please help. I'm doing the best I can here. Help me. And help me is me getting out of the bathtub and stop fighting. Because it's not I can't do it. So then I got to 8 and 9, where you start looking at all the amends you need to make. And I know that at that point I was living in the Sand Springs Widows Colony with my kids. And I lived right at the entrance, and there was one way in and one way out. You had to go in a circle. And a great cousin of mine or something, who I had gotten into a fist fight with in my grandma's yard eons of years ago, because she said I stole something from her son, which I lied about, which I did steal. She lived in the back and I lived in the front. And every time she went around, I was hopping around hiding. And I called my sponsor at the time, and I'm going, what the hell do I do? Well, go make amends to her. I don't want to make amends to her. Well, when I got tired of jumping behind trees and stuff, I went and knocked on her door. It didn't go well. She basically told me to go to hell. But I didn't have to jump and hide behind trees anymore. That's, so, and for me, 10, 11, and 12 are, it's just something that I take my own inventory every day. And my relationship with God, if I didn't have that, I probably would have killed myself in the last couple of years. I know I probably would have got drunk. I never thought about drinking, but for me to not do that, there has to be a higher power. And I'm always helping people out. Or I remember I was telling you on the phone today, I think it was the AA girl, the Central Service. One of my very first sponsors was Joe Disher. She used to run Central Service office. And here I was with 3 months clean thinking I know everything here. I'm an Eagle Scout in AA now, and I can, give you my wisdom. And Joe kept sending me out on 12-step calls. I was the first one she'd call. Andrea, you need to meet up with so-and-so. You and her are going to meet up. And so I was taking people to treatment. And as I got, older in recovery, she still called me and would go, Andrea, I need to go speak in Manford tonight. I remember one night I went to Hominy, and there were 2 greasy old men and me. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like 24 years old. But I just went all over places like that. And it was because, number one, if I want to stay sober, I can't keep it unless I give it away. So that's just part of what I'm supposed to do. And Joe Disher taught me that. And I used to call I was out of a blackout, still a little drunk, and I would talk to her. And I always thought it was a guy because she had a very deep voice. And then when I met her, I'm like, oh my God, you're Joe? So I can tell you that just because I got sober doesn't mean life didn't keep happening. And it doesn't mean that everything's like roses and rainbows. And a lot of times it's been like meteorites have hit my life. And everything's falling apart, and all I can do is stand there and say, God, please help me. There was a period of time, I have 2 grandchildren that I buried. And that one would have been 17, one would have been 15, January and February, a couple of years apart. And in the middle of that, it got to the point where I was afraid to answer the phone because every time I answered the phone, somebody was dead. And so I had my granddaughter I buried. And then a friend of mine was driving down the road, a friend of mine in AA, driving down the road, eating a granola bar, choked to death. Another young man in my son's wife's family was at home eating an apple and choked to death. Another in his wife's family, somebody I knew, fell out with a heart attack. I mean, it was just like people were dropping like flies around me, and it scared me to death. And so what I did was, as crazy as I was and as torn up as I was, I kept going to meetings. And I would walk into a meeting. I don't come to meetings for social. AA is not a social club. I'm sorry. I don't really care who you hook up with or who you find it, where you find it. That's not what AA is. AA is my lifeline, because I know for me to drink is to die. I know where I came from, and I tried to die. I tried to kill myself many, many times. I tried to drink myself to death, and God wouldn't let me die. And I would wake up and go, F you, God, why'd you let me come back? I didn't want to come to today. I didn't want to keep living. And so if what I believe is true, that I'm sober here, but I've been sober all this time and my alcoholism is out there by the door doing push-ups waiting on me, I'm screwed if I take a drink. So I just think, well, okay, I got to stay sober. And I have come into meetings just snorting everywhere, cussing everything. You name it, I've been insane. And God has just blessed me with people that love me anyways. And the women that have loved me the most have pulled me together, and I'll hold on to you while you're falling apart, but they're not afraid to bulldoze my bullshit. And I need that because, I mean, frankly, it's really easy to bullshit a guy, but you can't bullshit other women if you're a woman. And I used to think I could, but Beverly and this other lady, Carla, that was the sponsor of mine, they all proved to me I can't bullshit a woman. So I'm blessed in that regard. But in 2020, December 28th, 2020, I had brain surgery. And it was supposed to be this real simple thing. They plug a leak where I was having brain fluid leaking out my nose. And it turned into a 9-hour surgery. And I woke up and they said, don't worry, we did everything up through your nose, but we found out your brain was sagging out of your skull, so we had to put it back where it belonged. And I'm like, okay. And that was the weirdest thing I've been through. Yeah. It wasn't, after I got over the initial pain, it wasn't painful. It was just like somebody was walking around sucking all the energy out of me all the time. So for me to walk across the room to get a cup of coffee was like a major feat for me. And I would get on the phone with my mama and she would pray with me. And I believe in the power of prayer. My grandchildren would call me, and my son would bring my grandson over, or just different things. People were just there. But the miracle in that to me is I didn't drink. I didn't even think about drinking. There were other things I could have abused, but I didn't. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even want to. That's crazy to me, because that's not the alcoholic I was. Right on the heels of that, my mom almost died. Her husband got COVID. He died. Me and Mom, I drove to Florida about 7 months after brain surgery. I drove to Florida and got her and drove her back. And she was still in really rough shape physically, so we stopped every hour and a half. And we had this thing, we just got into a pattern together, and every hour and a half we'd stop somewhere, go to the bathroom, get something to eat, walk the dog. And you know what? I don't think we ever got mad at each other. We never, it was just, we got home. We made it home. On the heels of that, my father got sick, and that's been the hardest thing since I got sober, because my dad was abusive to me growing up, physically, and it took a long time for me and him to work on our relationship. And I grew to love him in a way. All the hate and anger that I had at him was gone. Was he perfect? No, not at all. But he was always there. He was like the safety net in my life. And God blessed me with a home, about a home. November 4th, we moved in. November 5th, my dad got sick. And it was like, I will work all day, go take care of my dad in the evening, work all day. It's like this all the time. And the day before he died, I know God told me to take off the next day. He was going to die. And I didn't. I went and stayed with him. And I held his hand when I was there for the last breath. And I remember, because the last month he couldn't talk, and I would sit every evening with him, and all he wanted to do was hold my hand and watch TV. And I would hold his hand and watch TV. And at the very end, I remember he was holding my hand, and I said, "Dad, it's okay to go home. I'll be there soon." And I meant go to heaven. He knew that. And he kind of gripped my hand a little tighter, and he went on. And if you'd told me the day I got sober that I could have been there to do that and stayed sober and been there for him, I would have told you no way. I would have told you he was a piece of crap and I don't want to be around him anyways. So I would not, that was one of the most horribly beautiful moments, sacred moments in my life. And it was one of those things I didn't want to do, but I wouldn't have missed it for the world, because I just know that I did right. One thing in my life that I did right. And everybody, before I got sober, they would say, "You aren't going to amount to shit." And if I did that right, that canceled all that out in my mind. So, I remember one of my first sponsor, Carla, told me to write down what I wanted, where I saw myself, if I had a year's sobriety or whatever, a couple of years, where I saw myself, and write down what I wished for. And I remember thinking a good job and this and that, nothing. But today I can look at what I have based on what I thought I wanted. And I actually lived to see my kids grow up, graduate high school. I have 4 granddaughters and a grandson, and they've never seen me drunk. My kids don't remember me drunk. My son does, but my daughter doesn't. My son remembers having to feed him and his sister, but he always tells me, "That's not you anymore." And I think about those things. My grandkids have never seen me drunk, and what a gift that is. So, I was thinking that I would close with something that I wrote, because it's been on my mind, and I mentioned it to my mom, and it's, if you'll indulge me for a minute. It's something I wrote called Mile Markers, and it's about how to keep hope when everything looks hopeless. So, and I wrote it back in 2020. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I have been sober since July 5th, 1986. I have stayed sober through God's grace and mercy, and with the help of a 12-step program. Along my journey, God has blessed me with different women who have been my spiritual teachers. I call these women my sponsors. Believe me, I would not be here without them. They have given freely of themselves and taught me how to use many spiritual tools in my life. I headed home yesterday from grocery shopping, and I started thinking about stuff going on in my life. Most of it I cannot control, and I was worrying about it. I started talking out loud to God about it while driving down the road. Then out of nowhere, I heard him say, "Where are your mile markers, Andrea?" See, my sponsor told me many years ago to make sure and erect mile markers in my life. These mile markers are the things I can look back on that I could see the hand of God working in my life. They will help me have faith when life is hard. They remind me that God has never left me and never will. So I started thinking about my mile markers. I remember a time when I was 23 or 24 years old. I was in the first 6 to 9 months of my sobriety. My children were 2 and 4 years old. I was a single mom, attending college and very active in 12-step meetings. I had a work-study job at school, but money was tight. This one particular night, it was a few days before payday, I had a couple of dollars left. I stood there putting my last few dollars in my gas tank and thinking I could go to my 12-step meeting and make coffee as I had committed to do, and I would not have enough gas to get to class the next day. Or I could skip the meeting, go home, and make it to class the next day. I stood there debating in my mind what to do. Then I thought, if I do not have my sobriety, I will lose my children, and school will be a faded memory. So I better go to my meeting. I said a prayer and asked God to take care of me. No one knew the prayer but me and God. I showed up early to my meeting and was making coffee. One of the old-timers came in. His name was Harold Inman. He had been sober longer than I had been alive, and he was like a grandfather to me. He always encouraged me. I remember him telling of being in prison and having to put cardboard in his shoes because he had holes in them, and he would rather blow money on booze than buy new shoes. Yet here he was, a fine and intelligent man. He worked for attorneys and judges and was esteemed by them all. I had the greatest respect and admiration for him. After Harold and I got the meeting set up, people started coming in. We were busy greeting them. Right before the meeting started, Harold called me down the hallway away from everyone. He hugged me and slipped $60 in my hand. I started crying because I had not told anyone about my earlier prayer at the gas pump. I told him I could not take the money because I could not pay it back. He said, "Andrea, God told me to do this. I never said you had to pay it back. Just pay it forward someday." I thanked him and promised him I would. I was able to fill my gas tank and get food for my kids for a few days and make it through till my next payday. I will never forget that mile marker. For me, it was a holy, sacred moment when I saw God in a man. Harold and I remained friends until he went to be with the Lord. I paid it forward many times, still do in different ways. Harold taught me that. Life gets crazy and scary at times. Everyone says, "It will all work out and I'm praying for you." Once in a while, God speaks to someone who is listening and brings an angel to take care of us. I am so grateful for those angels today. I am blessed with many mile markers. So tonight, I am going to remember them and rest in His blessed assurance that everything will be all right. He has never left me and never will. Thanks for letting me speak tonight.